Welcome everyone, both here in person at Borough Hall, people watching on Zoom, or we're recording this and put up on our website and YouTube. So I'm also addressing those who are watching it on tape. Thank you for tuning in to the first of several of our public outreach sessions about the proposed sale of the Hopewell Borough Water System. Mayor Ryan Kennedy. My left, your right, Brian Morris. He's the longtime borough financial advisor who's been helping us with a lot of the analysis and work we've been doing here and our regular budget and everything else we do. To be honest with you, Mr. Brian, thank you. Councilman David Mackey, the head of our water supply team, Councilwoman Sherry Hook, also on our water supply committee, and Doug Walker, our borough administrator. Again, thank you all for coming. We're trying to split up information that we think and hope the community finds helpful about the potential sale into bite-sized chunks. So tonight's topic is largely rates, historical and analysis of it. You'll see some slides up here with some dates about things we have coming up. It'll be broadcast to the world, but July 17th is our next planned similar session on the next topics, which will include the capital repairs, future looking rate issues. And what we'll start talking about is defeasance, which is a word that usually Brian just uses, but what the impact would be of using the sales price that we would get from selling the system on our debt, or what the plan would be and how to analyze and understand what that means for our community as everyone prepares to make their decision in November. The end goal of this information, as well as any other information, is going to be out there, either from the purchase of the water system, New Jersey American, or anyone else, is to help everyone understand what their choice will be in November. We have, from a timeline perspective, the borough has, in the end of March, finalized the terms of a potential contract after having interviewed and considered 3 different bidders for the sale of the system. That contract is up on the website and is currently being reviewed by the State Board of Public Utilities and I believe the Department of Community Affairs. If they give us the thumbs up, we would then proceed to finalize a ballot question that would be on the November general election ballot. So come November, if everything goes as currently planned, you get to pick a governor, you get to pick a water provider, frankly, and I guess the school board's going to have a referendum as well. But it'll be a busy November, but our goal is to get as much information out in as usable a way as possible to as many people as want to listen. And as part of that, we will at the end have time for questions. And what we really want to know, particularly, obviously, if there's questions in particular about what we're talking about tonight, but other things that you think would be helpful to know, different ways to explain things, information that you'd like to see, things you didn't like hearing, frankly, or we're not presenting in a way that you like, and you can ask them tonight. You can reach out to us offline. Our goal is to understand what people want to hear, how they want to hear it, and deliver it in that way as best as we can. If I can get my so for those online, I'm going to share my screen. I almost forgot to do that, and get our slide presentation here up online. And if I can get my cursor over there. All right. So as I just kind of previewed, on March 20th, we did a resolution advancing that draft contract, the terms, and there's a fact sheet up on the water website that explains both. You can read the whole contract and see what it would say. And there's a kind of a summary document as well. It does not include the sewer system. We are not selling our sewer system. That is not for sale. That's not part of the contract. It is just the potable water system. As I said, it's currently being reviewed by the Board of Public Utilities and the State Division of Department of Community Affairs, or DCA, right now. We expect that to be completed in the coming weeks, in time for us to finalize the form of the ballot question. And again, that will be in a yes or no fashion on the ballot in November 2025. You'll see this on the website as well, but just the brief highlights of the contract. It's an immediate resolution. And one of the reasons we entered into, if you remember, this acronym WIPA, or the Water Infrastructure Protection Act, was because of an emergent condition with PFAS contaminant that was a violation for our system. It would result in the immediate rectification of that, and immediate transition to their regional water rates as set or approved by the Board of Public Utilities, which is largely what we're talking about here tonight. A commitment for them to make $7 million of infrastructure improvements to our water system in the first 5 years. That will largely be the subject of a future meeting. But that includes changing all our lead service lines by the 2031 deadline, their cost, a $6.4 million payment to the borough. Again, in future meetings, we'll talk about what that means and start thinking about how we would address that as a community. I'd like to promise it would be all tax relief. It will not be. That's just not sustainable. But we will talk as a community about what that means for our budget and the things that we can do. And includes the sale of all of the physical assets, the buildings, distribution system, reservoir, and property. However, the historic well houses would actually receive historic protection through an easement and likely be returned to the borough permanently if New Jersey American determines they don't need to use them for their purposes. So, kind of summary before I turn it over to David and Sherry, who will be kind of giving the presentation tonight. Big picture items that we want to get out there that we thought was just too much for one night. So tonight's going to be a rate announcement. We're going to look at New Jersey American rates and ours going back a long time to understand where they go. You know, do they intersect in places? And there's some helpful information there about forward looking with the rates. No one can predict the future, but there's some of this information we think helps us understand what the future will look like. So that's a comparison of the rates. If this were to happen, what you would pay now versus what you would pay with them. And then some explanation of what it means right now. I'll say, control our rates. We set them as a function of council by ordinance. So that would, if we were to sell it, we, I guess in a way, lose control over that. Though as someone participating in that, I don't know that we really control it. As a self-liquidating utility, our obligation is to take the costs from it and split them up amongst ourselves. So we technically set that by ordinance, but ultimately we're required by state law to have the rates be equal to what it costs to run our system. And then we'll talk about, and Brian, our financial analyst, will talk more in particular about what it means if we're not doing that in-house, what it means for New Jersey American, for example, as a regulated public utility, to go to the Board of Public Utilities and ask for a rate increase, and how that works, who has our back there, so to speak, and how often they do that. At a future meeting, we're going to talk about the purchase price. This time we'll talk about what you might save or different in rate if we just switch New Jersey American. There's also this impact of what they will pay for the system, and what the impact of that might be. Just for rough examples, if the average customer saves, say $300 to $900 a year in water, that is certainly a significant piece of the thinking, I would think, for people. But the purchase price might allow us to retire all of our municipal debt. So we currently have more than $7 million in municipal debt, and between the purchase price and the debt reserves we have, it's possible that we could be a situation where we don't have any debt, and we spend about $1 million a year on principal and interest on that debt. And there'll be a kind of a understanding by the community, like, well, what do we do if we're not spending $1 million on that? What do we do with it? Is it tax relief? Is it investing in other things that we haven't been able to look at? That will be a discussion for all of us to think about. And then the final topic, capital costs. The improvements to the system that we need to make, what our plan would be to do it when we keep the system, what that might look like for rates and the type of grants or programs we can get to try to keep that as reasonable as possible, or what New Jersey American would do with their program to have us function and be resilient. So with that, I'll turn it over to David and Sherry, and we can kind of move along.
All right, I think I'm gonna stand over here just because I can wait to place. So good evening, everybody. So I was joking with everybody earlier. I said, you know, how with movies, they always have those little warnings, you know, there's gonna be nudity and violence, whatever. Tonight, there's gonna be graphs. So I'm just telling you. So this is, I've been working on this, working with the team on this analysis for, I don't know, 3 months or so. And it kind of started with, you know, the obvious question of, well, how do our rates compare with rates in New Jersey American if we were to sell the system? But also, you know, a fundamental aspect of selling the system is you basically surrender control over your rates, right? You sell the system and you no longer set rates. Somebody else is setting them. And, you know, there's always been concern about, well, what happens then? I mean, it's kind of an irreversible decision. You know, you sell the system and, you know, what happens going forward? There's this other entity that is in charge. And that entity is regulated by the Board of Public Utilities, and Brian's gonna explain a little bit about that tonight, how that works and what the safeguards are, but it's still another entity, it's not HOPA. So, you know, to some degree, you have to have a little bit of crystal ball, which we don't really have, you can't really predict the future. But one of the things you can do is you can look at trends in the past, and so one of the things that we did when we put out the RFP to possible bidders for this was we asked all the companies to give us their tariffs, which are the schedules that have all the rates, going back 15 years. So we could actually look at the history over a decade and a half and see what's going on. And, you know, we gave those a general review when we were judging, you know, possible candidates. But then once we actually decided who we were going to take to the dance, as I put it, we really bored into that in detail. So for New Jersey American, that was 900 pages of documents, and went in there and extracted all the, and there are a bunch of different rates, and put them all into Excel and tracked them over time. And we're going to present all that tonight so you can see what actually has happened. I also then did the same thing with Hopewell. I started out just looking at their stuff, and I said, well, while I'm doing this, we should look at our own and do a comparison side by side and see how it all works. Another thing we did, and this is just another way of comparing things, is we said, okay, so you have to, and as you'll see, you have different rate structures between Hopewell Borough and New Jersey American. And the costs are calculated in different ways. And so if you're trying to do an apples to apples comparison, and all these things are different, like fire hydrant rates and all these different things, you know, how do you do that? So one way was to say, well, our community uses X amount of water. Let's, in this case, it was 35 million plus last year. And then we have various services that we provide or that New Jersey American would provide. So if we take all those rates into account for that amount of water, for the number of customers that we have, can we figure out what the total cost would be for all of that in our community if we were to sell the system? So I call that the total community water cost, something I invented. It's just another way of looking at it. But this is what you try to do. You try to find different ways of digging into this and asking questions and seeing what it shows you. So that's a little exercise that will lead you through. And then finally, you know, again, when we dug into all these 15 years of rates, we actually looked at the trends and over time, so you can actually plot them up and see how costs compare. And one of the things you'll learn as we go into the rates is that what you pay is obviously related to how much water you use, but the actual rate you pay also changes to how much water you use, at least in Hopewell Borough, because we have a complicated system. So if I can have the next slide, please. And I should back up. So the first thing we did actually, before we even dug into the rates, was to say, well, what are people's patterns for how they use water, right? I mean, we have all sorts, we have residential users, we have commercial users. How do they use water? So out of that 35 million plus gallons, how is that kind of allocated among different people? So this histogram gives you an idea of how that works. So on the lower axis, this is thousands of gallons. And this is residential usage right here. So a little less than 800 active accounts. This is 2024 data. And the histogram is basically showing you these numbers in purple are the number of accounts or the number of users in each of those categories. And so you can see that the largest use categories are 5 to 10,000, 10 to 15, maybe 15 to 20,000. So it turns out about 70% of our users are in that middle. And then as you get into the higher lows, now I used a little trick here because to make this graph and actually make it fit on the screen and go up to 200,000, I had to change the scale here. So you'll see we go from 30 to 50 and then it suddenly goes in 50,000 increments. And that's because there's not a lot up here in terms of detail. At any rate, what you can see, there's like one residential user, which is actually a farm that uses a lot of water. But for the most part, most of us are down in here. The next slide. Oh, actually, before you, sorry, back up. This is like just a couple things. So the average for residential use is about 11,000 gallons a quarter. This is quarterly use. And just to explain how we did this, so I got a complete data dump for all the accounts for 2024 and went through, and then I calculated an average quarterly use. The reason I used an average as opposed to a total was, as you know, we had a big drought last year, and that really changes people's water usage. So what you're trying to do is arrive at something that's typical, that isn't skewed too much by the fact that you had a drought when people might have been using more water. So, you know, it's an estimate, but I think it's a pretty good fix. And I compared this to what we had for 2023, and it's pretty similar. So yeah, 97% of these residential customers use less than 25,000. And then there's about 4% that use down there in this lower range. That's why they had that little 2 to the scale. We're going to talk about that a lot, actually. Okay, so next slide, please. So this is our commercial. These are our commercial accounts. You can see the distribution is a little bit different. You have a substantial number of people, relatively speaking, you know, fewer accounts, but you have people up in this higher usage range. These are, for the most part, food establishments, as you would imagine. They use a lot of water. Chubby's, I think, is right about there, about 150, 160, 175. And some of these may also be, you know, banks that do a lot of irrigation in the summer. You know, it's hard to tell, but there's a fair, and then the offices and smaller businesses that don't use as much water. And then I think, you know, down here in this kind of 0 to 2,000, 5,000, that's probably offices that, you know, they don't use a lot of water. They don't have a kitchen. They flush the toilet a few times a day, or maybe take a shower, and you know, they don't consume that much water. So average for them, the mean is about 19,000 gallons up in here. The median is more meaningful, and that's about I think 11,000. But still about 80% use less than 25,000. But then you have kind of more down in this low range, which is kind of what you'd expect. So next slide, please. Okay. So this is our rate structure and our current rates in Hopewell Borough, which requires a little explanation because we have a fairly complicated system. So there's essentially a flat charge that applies to every user for that first, well, actually every user regardless of their usage, which is $20. It's a user fee, and then, which we added a few years ago, and then on top of that is the starting at 45, and that's for the first 2,000 gallons. So whether you use 0, 1,000, or 2,000 gallons, you're going to pay basically this total, which is about $59.45. So above 2,000 gallons, we have a graduated rate scale. And actually, until about, when did we make that change? That was April? Yeah. Until then, these rates all went up. The higher your usage, the higher the rate you would pay. And then the theory behind that historically was always to kind of, you know, encourage conservation and so on. But one of the problems with it was that the restaurants that really use a lot of water, they were just getting hammered. And we had a pretty significant rate increase that happened in March of 2024 to the tune of about 50% for the high-end users. And that was partly based on costs that we had to absorb from unanticipated expenditures the year before. This year, 2024, we were doing better, or 2025, and so we were able to reduce the rates in these upper levels a little bit to give our businesses a break. We pretty much left the rest of this the same, but a couple takeaways. One, in the 0 to 2,000 range, it's a flat number. It's not volume dependent, but then here it's what we call volume dependent or volumetric, and these rates are graduated as you go upward. And then, you know, above 40,000, that's pretty much unlimited. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is New Jersey American. They have a different system. Their system also has essentially a flat charge. First of all, they bill monthly as opposed to quarterly. But we've obviously accounted for that in all of our calculations. So they have a monthly service fee, a flat fee. There are a couple of other fees that are in there, and that totals up to about $23.66. I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail about what these are, but this distribution system improvement charge and this resiliency and environmental system investment charge, this is relatively new. These are surcharges that are added on there to pay for capital investments in infrastructure. This one has been around for a while, and the way those work is on a 6-month schedule, and Brian, you can stop me anytime when I get this wrong, but they're basically on a semi-annual schedule. They submit something called a foundation filing to the Board of Public Utilities that outlines all of their capital expenditures on certain types of improvements. It could be water main replacements, it could be water treatment systems. And they say, this is what we spent, this is a list of all the projects that were completed. And this is kind of a pay-as-you-go thing, they're not actually bonding for this stuff. And then they say, this is the total number of subscribers that we have right now, and we're gonna distribute that amount across this number of people for the next 6 months. And so that's the fee that goes on there. So these can change every 6 months. It's probably more than you ever wanted to know, but there's about a 2-year cycle when the major rates are changed, and these things are set to 0, and then every 6 months they go up again. So anyway, I'm just letting you know that that's what those are for. I used to joke, this is like staying in New York when you get all those taxes on your room bill and you're trying to figure out what they are, but at least these ones make some sense. So these are the flat charges. These are what we call volumetric charges. Those are the charges that are based on how much water you actually use. So you're gonna pay that no matter what, and you would even pay that for 0. And then on top of that, you're gonna pay based on how many thousand gallons. So this is the main one, which is the water charge. That's actually the cost of the water that you're buying. Close to $9 per 1,000 gallons of water. This is a purchase water adjustment clause charge, which I had to remind myself and look this up again today. This is something that they're allowed to charge to compensate the utility for water that they purchase from other utilities, because actually they don't produce all their own water. So again, this is something that gets updated periodically as that change, and all this stuff is strictly regulated. This is a lead service line replacement charge, and that's actually mandated by law. So there's a lead service line replacement law that basically says that all public water supplies, publicly owned, privately owned, have to replace all their quote lead service lines by July of 2031. And under the law, they're actually required to assess the charge of those capital improvements on their customers. And it's the same thing with these. They say, this is the number of lines that we've replaced in these communities. Here's what it costs. And every 6 months, they go to VPU. They give them a foundation filing. It's like 150 pages long, which is all public. You can all see it. And they justify this cost. This cost goes up and down. It actually went down in the last cycle because I guess they had done less work. This will be finished by July of 2031, which is when they have to complete all their lead service lines. So that fee won't exist after that. And this is a special programs charge, which had to do with deferred charges during COVID, with all the crazy stuff, I guess, that was happening there. And I don't understand all of it, but Ryan, it's COVID related.
It's COVID related. It also goes away after a next period.
It goes after a way, it sunsets after a certain period. So anyway, just explaining these so you know it's not all sort of smoke and mirrors. But so that's the basic. And these actually rates take effect tomorrow. Every were updated, and then the effective date was tomorrow. So we make sure everything's current. Our rates on the previous slide are as of April 1st. So next slide. Yep. Oh, right. So this is another part of this, which we probably haven't talked about that much. So this is also New Jersey American. This is for fire protection related services. So you have buildings in town. This is for what's called private fire protection service. You have buildings in town that have sprinkler systems, and this is these are fees for basically standby water supply for those sprinkler systems. We actually have a rate schedule for the same thing we've never enforced it. There was a decision, I guess, made by council years ago that we would just absorb the cost and distribute it across all the ratepayers rather than assessing it to individual owners. And you can argue both ways on that, but essentially there's a cost. And then this is depends on the size of your connection, the diameter of the connection. So the largest connections in town are building up a 6-inch connection. There's a handful of those, a couple of them. Most of them are 2-inch connections, at least the monthly charges for those. And then they also have a monthly fire hydrant charge. So if we were under New Jersey American, you know, those buildings that have sprinkler systems would be paying these fees for their sprinkler service. The fire protection service, which is they charge per hydrant, will be paid by the fire district, by the Hopewell Fire District. And I think some of that is shared with the township. This number, I put in here per contract because the rest of these are pretty much right out of the tariffs, but this was a number that New Jersey American offered in their proposal, which is about a quarter of the number that you would be paying, for example, in Princeton Township under the regional tariff. I think they realized that for us, because we had not been charging a hydrant fee, that was going to be a big jump. So in Princeton, I think it's like $65 a month per hydrant. It really adds up. And you'll see what the totals are for these things actually on the calculation that we did. But this I think, relatively speaking, is a good deal. And actually, if you think about it, it makes sense because hydrants actually do require maintenance. They do require replacement periodically. They're obviously critical to maintain. It is part of the infrastructure. So I think it's not unreasonable to charge something for it. That's just my own opinion. But I just want to make sure that you understand all the rates that apply. Okay. So first thing we did, just comparing rates, and again, as you probably gathered, if I haven't saturated everybody already, with these different rate structures between Hopewell and the borough, and also the fact that rates change according to how much you're using, you really have to look at a cost comparison at specific usage rates. So just say at 50,000 gallons per quarter, what does it cost for New Jersey American? What does it cost for Hopewell Borough? That's how you do that. Otherwise, there's just too many numbers. And so I did that. I have what I call a rate function that just generates this according to whatever number you plug in, another one for Hopewell, and we put them on a graph, and you can see that the Hopewell Borough rates are, you know, substantially higher than New Jersey American. Their rates are basically linear. They have this fixed monthly fee, and then it just goes straight up from there. Ours, you'll see a couple little kinks because we have our graduated rate system. But the thing is, remember, most of the people that we're talking about are in this area of like 0 to 25,000. So we need to look at this graph at a different scale. I wanted to show you the full scale because this does include some of our users. But and again, this is mostly commercial and this is residential and commercial. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is our blow up. So now we're going 0 to 25,000. So now you can see that for most people, the Hopewell Borough rates are higher. It's that same curve, but there's also an area here that's a little different, and this requires some explanation. So remember, our rate up to 2,000 gallons is a flat fee. It's at $60. New Jersey Americans basically starts at here and goes upwards. So the biggest, the place where really our curve falls below theirs and where the biggest discrepancy is, and this is annual cost for water, is $129 a year if you're using exactly 2,000 gallons. Okay, that difference is less if you're up here at 3,000. It's less if you're down here at 1 or 2. But this is the biggest discrepancy between the two. It's about 5% of our customers overall that based on 2024, right, changes, but that's about where it is. And we're going to talk about that at several times in this, just because, you know, it would be a nice simple story if we said, look at this curve is higher than New Jersey American for everything, and that's all we have to say. But the reason that rate is structured the way it is, our borough rate, is because we've been subsidizing it for years. We made a conscious decision that we thought, okay, our water's pretty expensive, but we want to basically say, like, from 0 to 2,000 gallons, we think this is kind of your essential water. So, but when you subsidize it, you're subsidizing on the backs of all these other people. So there are limits to how much of that you can do and how long you can do it. But that's the history of that. And it's important to understand because it's really kind of unique, this particular little section. And that's why. Next slide. Okay. So this is just a table. and it's really telling you the same thing. I like the graph better, but it actually attaches some numbers to this. So if you're at 10,000 gallons per quarter, which is the median for all of our users, the difference in cost between Hopewell and New Jersey American in a year is about $300 less. If you're using 20,000 gallons, you're saving close to $900. And again, when you get these larger users, now this, so for oh, and by the way, one of the things I may not have mentioned before. So New Jersey American, those monthly fees are based on the size of your meter connection, the diameter. So most people in town have 5/8, some people have 3/4, if you have an inch. There's 3 connections, I think, that are 2-inch in town. The school is one of them. So their fixed fee is higher for larger meters. For the most part, I didn't factor that into the comparisons because it's just too many variables. But when you get into like 150,000 for a restaurant, I thought it was good to have a 2-inch and a 5/8 inch you can compare. So, the restaurant, if they were using a 5/8, they save almost $5,000, but they don't save as much. They save almost $3,000 with a 2-inch connection. And probably most restaurants are not a 2-inch. They're probably somewhere in between, but just for the sake of full transparency, I wanted to show the range. And you'll see that on one of the other graphs. And then here is your 2,000 with your $129 difference, which is the only one that's a positive on these analyses. So it's just another way, same thing we showed on the graph. And then just about 70% of the whole distribution, 5,000 to 20,000, that's about 70% of our customers in that box. Next slide, please. Okay, so more word salad. I can just explain this to you, but so the total community water costs. So again, this was this idea of taking all these different complicated rates and putting them into one basic comparison and say we have this much water for the community, irrespective of who pays for it in the community and how that cost is allocated, what would it cost? It's just as a lump sum under Hopewell Borough versus New Jersey American. So the assumptions were based again on 2024 data, 892 customer accounts, 37.5 million gallons. We have 14 statewide fire protection connections for sprinklers. We have 77 fire hydrants. And so basically for the New Jersey American rates, we calculated it using those quantities. Our total community water cost is our budget, right? That's what it costs for us to deliver all those services. So that's a simple one, right? The other one takes a little math. So next slide, please. So, and I apologize for the small font. I wanted to have all of these line items in there so that, they were captured, but I do try to make things larger so people can read them. But the key, so this has got the hydrant fees, it's got the fire connection services, the special program charges, all the stuff you saw up there for New Jersey American. You see obviously the water charge is the big nut, monthly services charge is the big nut as well. And then total that up, I get $677,350. I also, I didn't have the exact number of connections over 5/8. I know how many 2-inches ones, so I think I figured 10% of them are 1-inch connections, and anyway, factored it in, so we're not missing that. So it's an estimate, but there it is. And this is our Hopewell Borough water budget for this year. So basically, we're 27% higher than that. And again, this is a singular measure to be put in perspective with all sorts of other measures. It's just one thing. But I like to look at this from different perspectives and see how it fits, and hopefully it's helpful to you. Next slide, please. Okay, and now comes the really fun part. There will be graphs. So as I mentioned, and Sherry, you wanna wait?
You're doing great.
Okay, I'm just backing on and all right. Throw something, So went through all the tariffs, as I said, and typical tariff document, New Jersey American is like 125, 150 pages long. There's all these different rate schedules for different areas, different regions. Once you get to understand it, it's pretty easy to walk through. Put it all in there into Excel, calculate the annual water costs for users at different levels, just like we did with ours. But we did this, but then we had to do something else because we had to account for inflation over the last 15 years. If you don't count for inflation, you get very crazy results. So we put everything into, everything you see is in April 2025 dollars. I'll explain a little bit about what that is, because most people don't, use the consumer price index that much. And then we actually plotted them up on graphs so you can see the changes with time. And then another thing we did as another measure was to say, okay, if you look at the cost of, well, let's say you're talking about 10,000 gallons of water, and you have the cost in 2008, and you have the cost in 2025. Just take that starting cost in inflation adjusted dollars, that finishing cost, and regardless of how much it bounces around, and say, if you just average that on an annualized basis, what would that percentage increase be? And so you're looking at it from the perspective of somebody who's a homeowner or a business, and they're saying, okay, this year relative to last year, how much did the cost of my water go up? And so you can compare that, and you can see visually how these things trend, but you can also have a sort of a mathematical measure that says, typically, what was the annual increase if you spread that out? Okay, next graph, please. So quickly, a little boring lesson of nominal versus real value, but nominal value is the amount we pay for something at a particular time. The inflation adjusted, or what I'm going to call the real value, is a value you've adjusted to account for inflation. So it comes down to this: it's the money at a particular time and place has a purchasing power, and that purchasing power changes over time. So if you're looking at something 10 years later, you need to adjust it for inflation to make sure that you're accounting for that, so you're comparing the same thing. So the way we did that is, next slide, please. We use the consumer price index. This is like an easy thing. I love this little website. You go there anytime and plug in anything and calculate the net inflation on it. It's very useful for all sorts of stuff. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And as long as we still have Bureau of Labor Statistics, this will be a good thing. And and this is how they describe the consumer price index. It's an average change over time, price, pay price. So it's for a basket of goods, right? There are different things they do it for, but this is sort of for everything. And like I said, you can go to this website. And what they're looking at, though, is they're looking at the difference, the inflation relative to a year ago. So as I'll show you on the next, well, and this is an example, just if you purchasing power of $100 in 2008 would be $151 roughly in 2025. So and that's about the time frame we're talking about. So you can see how that's significant. So next slide, please. Okay, this is probably hard to read. I'm sorry, I took it right off the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, and I was too lazy to make my own graph. But I just wanted you to see how the consumer price index changes over time, particularly during this period from 2021 to 2023, COVID time. We all know that inflation was really high. So if you're looking at the basket of goods here compared to a year before, I mean, look at this number. This is pushing up around 9%. So if we're going to look at rates over that time period, if we didn't adjust for this, we would get a very different impression of what rate changes actually were. Next slide, please. Okay. So I figured I'd start with the ugly one, and this is the one where we're talking about that 0 to 2000, right? The one where we're actually, it costs more for Jersey American than Hopewell Borough. Now you can kind of see over time. So this is 2008 to 2026. This is an inflation adjusted dollars, so everything is zeroed out to April 2025. And if you didn't do that, by the way, this curve would look like this, right? You would see it going up and up and up. What this does is it brings all this into line with the inflation rates. So again, we've been subsidizing this. You can see actually, we kind of forgot to make any adjustments on this for a long time. So in effect over here, we weren't even keeping up with inflation, which I think was probably not the best way to do it. But at any rate, this is where we are today. And you can see where New Jersey American their trend is, which is like more normal. So when I calculate this average annualized increase for Hopewell Borough, it's a little less than 1% change between this and this. But obviously, there's a lot of noise in between. And this, by the way, when this went up like this was in 2023 when we realized we were going to have a shortfall and we had to add that $20 per month user fee to guarantee a certain amount of revenue, regardless of whether we had a drought or a heavy rainfall period. We just had to have it. But this hadn't been adjusted for a long time. It was way overdue. Then if you look at New Jersey American, the annualized annual change for this particular usage level, it's about 2%. One thing I'm gonna point out from the outset is that we're gonna talk next time about where we think our rate curves are going to go with the capital expenditures that we're gonna have to make in the future if we keep the system. And we're gonna do that as precisely as we can. But today, it's just from right now, going back 15 years, July, we're gonna have a lot of fun going forward and trying to estimate that. Okay, so next slide, please.
David, actually, just before
Oh, yeah.
you go, this
Yep.
slide, just to,
Yep.
as a maybe a reminder. This represents about 35 residential customers in town.
I think 35, yeah, yeah, I believe it's 35, it was on that, probably on that first, history, but, yeah.
And if you were to add up that total difference of everyone, it's
Oh,
about
yeah.
$4,000 total.
Yeah, I mean, if you put residential, I think I've got to like $6,000, so if we had to offset this cost someplace out of our budget in a different way, and actually we'll talk about this later, but one of the things we could do, because we're not selling our sewer collection system, and our sewer collection system is in great shape, thanks to the Stony Sewage Authority. So if we wanted to, we could restructure our sewer rates a bit to give a little bit of an advantage to people at the low end. And the interesting thing about that is, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, but our sewer rate structure is flat up to 10,000 gallons, whereas this is flat to 2,000. So in a way, everybody's paying $92 a quarter for sewer, even if they're only using a little bit. So a fairer way to do it would be to adjust that. Haven't completed that analysis, but hoping to have it done by July so we can actually talk about that and maybe some other options. But it is important to remember, though, when you're looking at water and sewer together and you get those bills together, and they are separate entities, but we're not surrendering rate control on sewer, and you're actually, the low volume users are actually paying more for sewer right now than they're paying for water. So, and that one I would chain myself to the building before we ever surrender control over the sewer system. So, okay, so now let's go up to 5,000 gallons. So now we're sort of at the bottom of that 70% of our customers that, use say 5,000 to 25,000. So here, the borough, surpassed the New Jersey American rate back in around 2024, probably when they had that first rate hike. And we were kind of tracking not too far apart then. But here's what's interesting about this. So look at how steep this change is over time relative to New Jersey American at 5,000 gallons. The difference is not that much these days, but if you do that annualized rate where you just take this number and you figure it out, it's 5.5% for the borough versus 1.7% for New Jersey American. By the way, when I started doing this stuff, I was completely blown away by this stuff. I had no idea what I was going to find. This was not what I was expecting to see. So next slide, please.
Can I just,
Yeah.
Because this is hyper technical and I really appreciate it, so I'm learning a lot. I'm afraid, I don't know if anybody else agrees with me, that I might forget the context or lose a particular question I want to ask about that slide.
Okay.
Should we wait till the end or will you entertain?
Well, if you wouldn't mind, but I'll tell you on this, there's a series of these slides. They all
Is there
are
a
the same.
slide number I can refer to?
Well, there will be, and all this will be, because there's a progression of these that are doing the same thing over and over again. Maybe when we get to the end of them, if you don't mind, because you'll just see.
Because I'll just put in your head that I have a question, for example,
Okay.
about, it was the slide before that.
Yeah, let's go back up to, the.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
This one.
this one, okay, yep.
And I also have a question of the one before that.
Okay, it was about those
What
percentages.
we
and if they-
can go through them again when you have questions, if you.
Yeah, but just to put it in your head, because I'm gonna
Got
forget
it,
it.
okay,
It just related to it. Don't address it now, but address it later.
okay, yeah, well.
Just so I can plan to see, if you could address to what extent that might correlate with non-recurring, unanticipated high expenses that go away in the next year.
Okay.
That's the question.
Okay, no, it's a very good question,
Yeah.
and it kind of touches on what we're gonna talk about
Yeah,
in July.
But I just wanna slow you down.
Because then we're gonna hit on some major capital
Yeah,
expenditures and
yeah.
then it's gonna
Thank you.
change. But no, it's a good question. And again, I'd be happy to go back to any of these and we can just scroll and go, oh, that one. Because otherwise I'm gonna do this and then I'm gonna plot.
Yeah,
But,
great. Thanks.
Okay, 10,000. So this is the median user, right? Anybody who doesn't use statistics, the median is 50% of the people use more, 50% of the people use less. It's sort of right in the middle of the pack. Sometimes it's more descriptive than the average, but typical, let's just say typical user of 10,000. So now, and you're looking here at a difference of, 690 versus 1,000 for the borough. But again, you see this big kick as we had to make that adjustment in our rates. But here's the interesting thing. Again, I just want you to keep track of this at the bottom. So New Jersey American, the annualized, what happens is it starts to flatten out as you get into these larger numbers. And the reason is those fixed charges are there, but now those volumetric charges are dominating it, right? So that's why you have to keep looking at different quantities. So if you just look at this and you look at the borough, it's like the borough rate overall, again, it's not linear, it's about 3 times faster increase than over this period than New Jersey American. So, okay, next slide, please. 15,000, so we're going a little bit, but again, the other thing you're seeing is the spread between our costs and theirs is going up and up, and also what you're seeing is that our costs have been higher than New Jersey Americans going all the way back to 2008, and I honestly had no idea of this. The thing is, we're looking mostly at the low rates and going, well, we're subsidizing this and we're just good, but until you sit down and you calculate this stuff, it's really hard to see where you are. So this shocked me. And that's, again, I started looking at this only, and then I said, we should put the borough up there and see what it looks like. And I went, wow. So anyway, and again, so where we seem to be going, again, this is just up to now in the last 15 years, is the New Jersey American rates adjusted for inflation are, we're down around 1%, and Hobo Borough is, triple that in terms of how fast they've gone up. Again, more recently than a while ago. So next one, please. So same thing, yada, yada, but there's 20,000. This is a lot of people. So now we're looking at, you're spending about double the annual cost on water at 20,000. 20,000 is like a house with a bunch of kids doing a lot of laundry. It doesn't take much to get there. I also recommend to people, if you're gonna water, get one of those little cheap $25 meters that you can put on your hose bib, a little digital meter, and you can keep track of how much actually comes out of that hose, because you'll be amazed, and it will change how you use your water. Because what happens in a drought, and I noticed this when I was going through the data for last year, you had people that were using modest amounts for a long time, and then all of a sudden, they went from 5,000 to 20,000, I think, because they didn't realize when you turn that soaker hose on for 4 hours, there's more water than you think. But at any rate, so again, same deal, this is flattening out, we're down around 1% as a sort of rate of increase versus about 3.4 for the borough. So now we'll jump up, the next slide, please, to something more like a commercial user. This is 50,000. Now you can see here what happened. This is where we dropped the rate this year for those 3 uppermost levels to try to give our businesses a break. So that's why you see this kick downward. And, we were able to do it. We thought it was essential, particularly until we figure out, where this is all going. And as you see the rate of change here, it starts to converge in part because we've softened these rates at the high end, but I put the peak there just so you could see it, because that was only a year ago. Next slide, please. So now we're looking at 150,000 gallons. So this would be a restaurant, Chubby's, a couple other places. And I also put the 2-inch meter curve on there too, because, again, if you're using 150,000 gallons, you probably got a bigger line than 5/8. And this gives you the range of what those costs would be depending on your meter size. It could be 1 inch or 3/4 or whatever, but just in terms of full transparency, that's what your savings could be relative to this. I forgot to flag that number. I think that was $16,000. So think about the laundromat. That's about what they use. That was a lot of money. And now, the rate of change is about, because we're about where we were, a year and a half ago, because we knocked this down basically to where it was before the rate hike, because it was a small number of users, but it would make a big difference to them. So the rates are about the same, rate of change. So just some conclusions that came out of all this. So if we were to transition from current local borough rates to New Jersey American. You've seen the numbers are the typical household business might be saving $300 to $900 a year. High volume business, it saves substantially more, depends on the meter size. Back to that 2,000 gallon per quarter user, which is about 5% of our customers that pay the flat fee. Probably talk about that more than we should, but it's just, it's there. And I think it's important, as I mentioned before, that there are ways that the borough can offset those costs, because the total amount of that is really not that much. And I think there's ways we could do that, again, probably through the sewer fees. You could also argue, and again, this is getting way ahead of this, but next month, we're gonna be talking about the effect of the sale, if the sale goes through, on the fiscal health of the borough. And when you look at that, and you look in terms of the potential effects on taxes and all sorts of other services, coming up with $6,000 for this is pretty small relative to the overall benefits it might accrue to the community. It's just a way of accounting for it. But again, one of the reasons we focused on this a lot is, just as we have with our rates of subsidizing it, we don't ever want to be a community that says, "Oh, we don't worry about those other 5%, we'll just leave them behind," right? We're gonna deal with that in some way. We just haven't figured out exactly how. Next slide, please. No, did I miss something?
No, I was just, that was the next slide.
Oh, okay.
Second.
So again, back to the total community water cost estimate. The cost for the borough, or budget 27% higher than the estimate. It's an estimate that we had for New Jersey American, but I think that's a reasonably precise number based on what we have. I think actually the variability is in, you don't know what our numbers are gonna be this year in terms of water usage. It's not, everything else is accurate, but you can't predict the future in terms of our water use. But I think if we look at the last 15 years, so for most users, the rate of increase of our rates overall in totality has been about 3 times the rate of increase for New Jersey American. And believe me, that just kind of blew my mind, because I'd never had a chance to really look at this stuff in time. And the other thing about them, I think, that you could see in those curves is that they're more stable, right? I mean, our rates have, certainly in the last couple of years, have gone up and down a little bit when we can. We're trying to do the best we can for the businesses. Again, there are going to be rate increases with us to cover capital expenditures that we have not implemented. Waiting to see what happens with the system. And we're gonna go into that in a lot of detail in July, but we wanted to deal with this in manageable bites, and hopefully this is manageable. But I think stability and predictability is important. I mean, I've never run a small business, but certainly people that I talk to, that's what they want. They want a predictable environment. So I think there's something to be said for having a situation where, you're pretty sure that your rate next year is gonna be within 1% or so of what it is this year, if you're a high water user and you're running a restaurant. And that is my cue to step aside, but we're not gonna forget you. We're gonna go back and we can do whatever you wanna go.
For
as long as you want to.
purposes, we've got about 4 slides left, so we're approaching the end of the presentation.
Yeah, and I'll be very quick so that we can get to the questions. I just want to touch a little bit on regulation, BPU, Division of Rate Council. Councilman Mackey did a great job of explaining a lot of the facets of what the rates are comprised of, and went a little bit into the cycles, the 2-year and 6-month cycles for American Water, how they set their rates. But to boil it down, the borough, of course, sets its rates by striking the water budget and splitting that across, the ratepayers in the town, about 800 or so customers. New Jersey American Water essentially does the same thing, but with 2 exceptions. Number one, they're splitting theirs across millions of residents, and I believe it was 600,000-700,000 customers or accounts. So much larger economies of scale to split those costs across. They also are regulated by the BPU. Every rate increase that they request must be submitted to the BPU, like was mentioned, 200-page packet with backup and rationale and testimony. that is heard by the BPU. They're almost like a judicial body where they, people come in to petition them for things, whether it's customers, the utilities, etc. They have the hearing and they approve, reject, or come up with some middle ground, solution. So again, they enforce other, in addition to rates, obviously, that's what we've been talking about a lot today. But they also make sure the service quality standards are there, and also enact clean energy and energy efficiency programs or whatever. Obviously, over the course of time, there's been different priorities, you know, from the state administration. The Division of Rate Counsel works with the BPU, but more as a consumer advocate. So they're there advocating for all of the residents in New Jersey, all the utility customers, residents, small businesses, others. And again, we're here in the capacity of water, but this applies to everything, electric, insurance, sewer, you know, you name it. So they use their staff and professionals to really scrutinize the proposals and try to negotiate and come up with what's a fair rate increase, what's justifiable by the numbers. Again, they are submitting this rate increase and this request based on the money that they have invested into all of these public systems. They of course are allowed to recoup a specific profit level, but they are evidencing we spent this money, and we saw it in some of those surcharges. We spent this money on lead service lines. We incurred these extra costs because of COVID, and it's all being justified and going into that rate. And the rate council works to really ensure that the rates are reasonable, affordable, and fair for residents of the state. So again, together, as you would assume, they're a check on the profits of these companies. They provide public accountability. They make sure all the information is publicly discussed, publicly heard, and reviewed. They use their experts to make sure that everything is on the up and up. And of course, ensure that ratepayers are not overcharged and receive safe, reliable rates.
Before I get to the next slide, Brian, one question that I apologize, I did not suggest clearly with you before, but there's a lot of talk this summer about the BPU and energy rates. And I guess years ago, the legislature made a decision as far as electricity rates go, to have BPU's role be more limited, perhaps to the distribution and service side of things, and kind of lost control of the energy supply part of things. Is water different from that? Does BPU fully control the, distribution, the pipes, the cost of the water itself, or is it more like energy where there's less control?
So I don't 100% know the answer to that. I apologize how it relates to the electric side of things. But again, every dollar they spend, they are allowed to recoup through the state rate base. So the idea being, if they are investing in the system, they're recouping that in the rates. But again, they need to prove that what they're investing in and the charges and the amounts they're spending are reasonable. So for example, they had a rate case last year where they requested a double digit, I think it's 17% or so rate increase from the BPU. And they ended up settling at about an 8.5%. So
They being who?
American Water, so sorry. So just that as an example is it's not just a rubber stamp, this is what you want, here you go. There is a scrutinizing of this and reviewing all these documents, and maybe, I don't know specifically what was pushed back on and what was not included, but it's not just kind of a wild west of they can set any rates they want. Quite frankly, they're more regulated than the borough, as was mentioned before. The borough doesn't have, the council is the rate setting entity without any regulation or limitation.
Yeah, we're regulated by the Board of Public Finance, right? They say
Right.
you're either self-limiting or you're not, right? Yeah.
Right.
So,
So just from a going forward perspective, tonight, we wanted to focus on historic rates and a comparison of what they would be perhaps on day one, which is different from where they'll be perhaps once you factor in the capital cost either they're gonna do or we're gonna do. And while there'll probably be a period where if we were to all say yes to a sale in November, that this level of change in rates would be effective. The reality is that the delta that we should be considering is something that we're gonna talk about in July, because our budget of $860,000 does not factor in what it'll cost us going forward to deal with the capital improvements that we need to do. So that'll be for then. And then again, just to put things into perspective, we, and I'm sorry, tax about $2.5 million to do everything that the borough does a year. And of that, about $1 million of the $2.5 million that we, again, sorry, tax, and we all pay is debt service, the principal and interest that we pay on our $7+ million of debt. And one of the topics we'll talk about again in July is tonight is the difference in rates, their New Jersey Americans tariff rate, what we're charging now, and as David put it, the total cost of water, every check that relates to us for water totals $860,000, and the number that if it were today or tomorrow technically, what all those checks would for the same amount of water would go to New Jersey American. It's about $180,000 less overall, but that's just one piece. And then the cost, the benefit or value or how to think about what it might mean not to have debt, and the additional delta perhaps about what we would need to charge everyone and what New Jersey American would need to charge when you factor in how do we pay for the millions of dollars, the seven in particular of capital improvements to a reservoir, new pipes and things like that. And so this is part one, and the next couple meetings we'll start getting into part two of the things that will help form the kind of economic picture of this. As a reminder, go to our website /water. It has everything that we have on this topic. A link to the video from this will be there and all the other meetings. The slides will be posted, the fact sheet, the contract, all those things you can find there. And then, if you're not subscribing, and I think people watch it, but not many people subscribe to our YouTube, but people should subscribe. What do the kids say? Like and subscribe or ring the bell or something. But our YouTube channel would have this and all of our meetings up. So sorry, with that, unless anyone else has any thoughts, that now's the time for questions and. Yeah, sure.
I just want to say one thing before we get to questions. One of my roles on the water committee is sort of the council person on the street. And I want to know what people are thinking, because we sit here, we've been looking at these numbers for a year and a half. And I love that people are here and they're watching, because that means that you're doing your research and you're being well informed. And I want to know what people are researching, what they're thinking. And I'm just going to talk about rates, because one of the things that I hear about a lot is a fear of an immediate rate increase. And I keep hearing this number about 11% will sign this contract, and right away NJW is going to raise rates 11%. And I don't know exactly where that number comes from, but we looked at a lot of the sales that have happened in the state in the past. And the one thing that makes this potential sale very different from those is those sales all have a rate stabilization period, where they'll say, all right, for the first couple of years, there's 0% raise in rates, and then it's 3%, then 5%. And I'm thinking that's maybe where that mindset comes from. But what makes this situation so different is those graphs that you saw, that our rates in the borough are already so much higher than what New Jersey American charges. That almost never happens. So one of the reasons you have that situation is to make it fair. They say, all right, we're gonna let New Jersey Americans rates catch up to where the municipality rates are, but we're flipped. So what was negotiated was we're immediately going to drop down to what their rates are. And in some cases for businesses especially, that is a savings of thousands of dollars. And in addition, the fear of this out of control rate increase, I think is a little scarier for the borough than it is for a BPU regulated entity. So that I've been hearing that fear of a rate increase, and it would actually be the opposite. And I think we might talk at some point about this, the way the graphs are going
Going forward.
because
We will.
that never even mentions what we're talking about, the capital improvements and how we would have to pay for that. So if you play that out, NJW would never catch up to what we would have to pay. So that's my man on the street report.
Well, and thank you, and no, the thing is that there have been but there have been municipalities that have sold their systems whose rates were lower than the prevailing rates of New Jersey American at the time. They had various reasons for selling. The driver for us is not, oh, we don't want to run the water system anymore. It's because our rates, we just can't keep them within reason. But there are cases where, I mean, if you could take some systems where they would sell and their rates might go up by 50% over a period of time. So that's why they had that they agreed, they said, okay, for the next 3 years, we're gonna hold our rates within this, and then they'll go up, and then they're gonna reach our regional tariffs.
Yeah.
We were worried when we were putting out the RFP that people would wanna do the same thing with us. They'd wanna keep our high rates for a period of time.
Yeah.
And instead, at least with this particular applicant, they said, nope, day one, the day we close, you go on a regional tariff. In other words, you're paying what Princeton's tariff, it's 5 different counties all around us that are on the same region. Basically, the whole service area that used to be Elizabethtown Water before they were bought by. So, that was dramatic, because we were almost worried to even raise our rates because we're gonna be held for 3 years anyway. So yeah, that's an important distinction. And the other thing is to point out with what Sherry said is, particularly if you're looking at a rate increases in the last 2 to 4 years, with inflation rates we were talking about, if you just look at the nominal increase and you think, oh my God, is that what we're gonna see in the future? But in fact, when you factor in inflation, and I hadn't done that until 3 months ago, it changes your whole perspective when you realize how these, I mean, we're all conscious of inflation, obviously, we all live with it, but it makes a big difference when you're actually looking at the comparative side.
Okay, so with that, we'll start with people in audience, but if you have a question, feel free to come up and we'll do our best to answer or figure out how we can get the resources to get you that information at a, say another time. And I will also say, not everyone likes the public forum for questions, so this is not the only way to ask them. Feel free to do it now. That goes the same for people online. I'll ask to raise your hands in a second. We'll bring people over. But this part is this. I'll just note again that we are recording the meeting and put up on the website. But if you have questions and prefer not to do it in this forum, an email to our administrator, any of us, is also sufficient, and we'll get that answer back to you best we can. And we're preparing a kind of frequently asked questions, and we'd add on to that. Right. So,
That too.
so come on down.
Away.
David, thank you.
Very welcome.
Yeah, that's great, great presentation. David Waldman, local resident. A question, I just wanted to contextualize the seed that I planted. When you look at Hopewell with 1,900 or 2,000 people, and you look at some of the other American water people, and my understanding that they amortize a lot of their stuff over everybody, not just that municipality. So I was looking at the up curves and wondering, picking up on some of your earlier presentations, probably in April, and wondering to what extent, thank you, yeah, to what extent are those curves, when you drill down, which I'm into drilling down, to what extent are those curves, can they be explained to incorporate what you called unanticipated, or what I call potentially non-recurring, leaks?
In terms of our,
Yeah, on our side.
Yeah.
In other words, to what extent are those numbers not quite accurate if we're trying to do apples to apples,
Mhm.
if they incorporate, 20,000 gallon a day leaks and,
Right.
tear ups and explosions and, just probably, yeah, I'm just, yeah.
No, I mean, it's.
And that's really the question,
It's a really good question, because that point of inflection is right there.
But let me try very generally, and then I'll let David correct me and give you the specifics, there's a couple of things here. One is that is the intent to drill into that pretty deeply, no pun intended, with the water pun, sorry, in July.
Right.
Because there is a inflection point, particularly, I don't say inflection point, but there is couple things that these lines tell me. One, during that 15-year period, New Jersey American was doing things like building water plants and replacing water lines, doing large capital projects that don't result in spikes. So that one kind of just general meta thing here is that the way they spread their costs out, both over the world, that being New Jersey, and time has a consistency to it. I'm choosing my words a little carefully here, but we didn't do very much of that during this period.
And that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and in terms of large capital projects, and one of the big reasons for the big jump, and for perhaps not amortizing it out over a period of time, which perhaps in retrospect we would have thought to do, and maybe got to the same endpoint, but done it more gradually. One was unanticipated costs, and needing to spread them over a short period of time. However, in two respects that we'll go into very much detail next time, that undoing of that was not a one-time event. And while the need to catch up with perhaps water purchases slowed down or got more consistent, the implementation of other things that we should have been doing, one, filled that gap to the point where we didn't have the option to just reduce it. And then second, in our projections for capital costs and budget costs going forward, there's a period about 2-3 years from now, where we hope to have completed the well restoration project with well number 6, where we've got a grant in the works to remediate our one working well for a contaminant PFAS, and the same thing with well number 6, the second well, bring that online so we could conceivably produce most of our water, if not all of it, in-house. And when we get to that point and remove all of the purchased water costs, our budget is still higher in that year than it is now. So that while if you looked at that jump and think, oh, it's all purchased water and we're gonna get rid of that, we will talk about and kind of schedule and think about in more detail in July how unfortunately that's not the only factor. And even when we get down to not buying any water, more or less.
Yeah, and that was
the bill.
Yeah, and that was the trajectory, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
of my question,
Yes,
which
sure.
was. If and when we do the PFAS remediation, and then we're stuck with the 7 million we gotta find and deal with. That was really my question. Because we become somewhat self-reliant, where we have between 4 and 6, we have all the water we need.
Mhm.
Then it's a question of fixing all the stuff that we have to fix. And then I'm not gonna call it non-recurring, because there's
right.
shit always have,
Right.
there's stuff always
Right, so
happening.
no,
Yeah, yeah,
there's some long.
Yeah, so I wanna get rid of the big stuff and then go, and that's the question that we met with.
Yeah.
Mayor Doug, yeah, and that's the stuff, I think July 17th is gonna
Yes.
be.
Yes, I mean, that's where,
Yeah.
and we're gonna be looking at the next 10 years. They're gonna be looking at
Perfect,
the
yeah.
high priority
Yeah.
capital stuff that we absolutely have to do. I mean, the mains that are just, and I'll quickly use this little, it's not a metaphor, I guess it's a real thing, but you know how you go to do a little thing in your house, like your toilet's leaking or something, and you try to close the little valve. And you know what happens, okay, so either it doesn't close, or then it does, and you open it, and then it's leaking, and then, you're like, oh, I shouldn't have touched this, I should have called Landon right away, right? I want you to scale that up, because you're standing next to an 8-inch main, and you have to close it in 2 places to do a leak repair or put in a water service.
That's what I meant by.
Yeah, and David's out there, and he's been doing this for 37 years, and he's on that wrench, you've seen him, and he's like, if I turn this too hard, I'm gonna break the valve, and then we are really done. And this is, it really came up, on Broad Street, in the middle of the, I guess it was in the spring, we tried to get rid of an old dead water service in front of the museum, and if you drove by, you saw a bunch of water going out of a hydrant and all these pumps going, it was because we couldn't shut all the valves. Because that's part of the $4 million of main and valve replacements we have to do. Yeah, so that, anyway, but we're gonna go into that a lot, but we're also gonna talk about, and the little preview is just. So what's the breakdown between, salaries and benefits, operating costs, the things that in the short term go up and down, and then the debt service for the capital things, and then how does those proportions change and grow over 10 years? And that, and then you take all of that, and then you can derive from that what our rates would have to be to support it, and that's what we're gonna do in July. So,
Thank you.
welcome, you.
So thank you, everyone. I know how much hard work this is to put these together, and thanks everyone for being here and asking questions. And I just want some clarity, and it sort of is around what David said, and I'm,
Sue, Lori,
what?
your name?
Oh, Susan Pilara, resident now 20 years. So I've lived here probably as long as you've been on council, David, and so you're really the consistent thread, right? With everything that's the knowledge of this water situation and have been on the water committee. I feel like we're sort of talking about these unintended or unexpected costs in this very sort of passive way. And it's hard for me to understand, like, because I want to understand like the truth, like, is that big purple jump up because all of a sudden someone was finally looking at the water usage numbers and realized that there was this giant usage increase, and that's how we found the leak. Is that correct, Doug? Like how the leak was found? I'd like to hear from someone else.
Okay, all right, except Doug wasn't here when that happened.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. If someone else could help me understand how we didn't know there was, and how this very sort of, unintended cost when I don't understand. Like, can you explain how that leak was found? Is it because the word on the street, Sherry, like what we hear is somebody finally was looking at the numbers and realized there was a big jump and then Doug, it was my understanding, made the suggestion to put in the sensors.
Yeah, it was before Doug.
Okay, great. So if that could all be clarified now, because it's this very passive way you all are talking about unexpected costs.
Yeah.
That feels not so responsible if this was our system and we were trying to keep it,
I
so.
can give you the whole history. on it
And that's
if you want.
okay, I'd like someone else. I'd like to hear someone
I'll
else's
try, thank you,
perspective.
Susan,
Thank you.
yeah, so. In looking at these,
Yeah, can we go to that purple one where the big jump is? Yeah,
Well, that's where we raised our rates in 2020.
Yes.
right,
so,
so Doug was here in 2024, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and Ryan was here, yeah,
But
so
the
others.
leak
others
you're talking
here.
about was resolved before that.
yeah, so let me, thank you, Susan, I'll do my best here, and then one of the big delights about, sign up for a new volunteer job is to, nearly double water rates,
Right,
2 months into being here and 3 months into, Doug being our administrator, from my perspective, knowing what I know now. I think our rates are unfortunately at the right place, but that perhaps, should have been raised earlier. To flatten that curve, and perhaps we would have had this conversation potentially about whether we should be in this business earlier. But my understanding is that, I want to give Doug credit for everything in the world and he deserves it, but no, the contract for the leak detection was years before he came here. And ultimately, we did have in place, around the time of the big jump, as a self-liquidating utility, which means, we talk about control of our rates. Our level of control is the state says, you have costs, you need to pay all of your bills, and the only option to do that is to charge your ratepayers. So we had a period where kind of I'll say an acceleration of a perfect storm, where thankfully we had the contract in place to start identifying where these leaks were, because the team apparently had the foresight to start thinking of that, and I think it came out of an analysis that David did about, well, is there a difference here between our purchased amount of water and the total metered water? Because some of it, and it turns out quite a bit of it, is going into the ground in an unaccounted for way. And when that water goes into the ground and is coming out of your well, there's not really as much of a mechanical mechanism to notice that, because we total up what people buy. But if, say, water was coming out of our well, our own water, say going into the reservoir, and then not coming back downhill, we wouldn't really have a reason to know that until, someone like David does an analysis, frankly, sees the, kind of saw the picture of things, got this unique contract in place, so we have a better idea to start knowing where these leaks were. And then as that accelerates, the bills started coming, and we had a period where not only did our budget, the end of 2023, the amount that came in to purchase water that we couldn't produce in town, but not only exceeded our budget, but the way we had always done our rates, we had to collect that delta immediately in the 2024 year over 3/4 instead of 4. So we not only had this, at that time, significant extra cost. And when we talk about significant costs, when you're looking at what at the time was a $650,000 budget, these are numbers that are big for a small group of people, but with a bigger denominator, perhaps less extraordinary. So unfortunately, that was the perfect storm of getting the bills, thankfully having some of the infrastructure in place to start, to already be in the process of seeing where it was going. But that all started from an investigation period during a time where if the leaks are coming out of the ground and going back in of our own water, there's less of a signal that it's happening in my mind. And David, I know this was not the request, but I'm gonna ask David to chime in and both correct me and see.
Well,
what
I
parts of the
could
picture
just add some details to it, but it's a good point. So that the big leak, the sort of historic leak that really was the driver for that. It was about $80,000 or $90,000 is what it cost us. It was a residential service line. It wasn't a water main. It wasn't something owned by the borough. It was a little plastic line about that big. And it wasn't showing it the surface at all, which is something, honestly, as a geologist, I would never have imagined, because usually when I see a water main leak, you can see water coming out of the street. There wasn't so much as a damp spot in that front yard. So the only way it was found was with George Walter, our water leak detection guy, using his geophysical instruments, and he was like, "Oh, I can hear it," and he flips right onto the thing and you can hear the sound. That leak, I think we would have found much sooner if it weren't for the fact that it was in the middle of a protracted drought, and everybody was ramping up their water usage. So there was like a bunch of confounding things. That summer, the drought was from, I think it was July through October. Not last year, the year before. We also had an increase in water rates from New Jersey American, which, right after COVID, so when we're looking at the bills and so on, we're seeing the water bills go up. I'm looking at the volume anyway. Honestly, I think at the operational level, somebody should have been looking more carefully, but at any rate,
But so saying that, when you say that like that,
yeah.
that is a really hard thing as a resident to hear.
It's a hard thing for me to say, but let me just tell you something. I'm not gonna, if you wanna point the finger at somebody, if this is what you wanna do, is go back in time and see what was done wrong. Point it at me, because I've been doing this for 27 years. I'm not the one who turns the valves, I'm not the one who runs the system, but I'm certainly not shifting that to anybody else.
So thank you, David.
so-
I actually wanna say thank you for saying that, because in all these water meetings that we've been at, that, like, there have been operational issues and there have been these challenges that have compounded this issue. So hearing you actually say, yes, I was one of the people looking at this, feels as a resident, at least more like and I'm trying to say this like in the most
No.
direct and respectful way.
I understand what you're saying.
Like, thank you for saying, yeah, you know what, we should have been looking at the numbers a little bit differently, we should have been doing, because the impact of not hearing that for so long makes some of us not fully trust the numbers that are now being presented.
No.
And so, Ryan, I see you shaking your head. I am not a bad person trying to point my finger and blame somebody else. What I'm trying to do is find the best solution to be a contributing member of this community and help make the best decision. And I need to be able to trust these numbers. And it's hard for me to trust these numbers when it feels very like, well, unintended costs and work and operationally, when it's people, it's the
Well,
people who've been
Let
so.
me just
so-
say something,
yeah,
Susan, so you understand this. I'm the one who actually discovered the discrepancy.
Right,
But as a council member, it's not my job to be monitoring operational data every day, okay? It's something I do because I'm a data geek, and I looked at this and I started to see that something was clearly wrong in the system. So I sat down and I did this reconciliation. This is not what people on this governing body normally do. There are engineers that are supposed to be doing that. There's operational people that are supposed to be doing that. I can tell you as a geologist working for 30 years, I had no idea that you could have a 15 gallon per minute leak, by the way, there are 1,440 minutes in a day, and never see it at the surface, okay? It just wasn't something I would look for. Finally, when I realized that there was something seriously wrong with these numbers that couldn't be explained by the drought, it couldn't be explained by the change in the rates, I went, okay, I'm gonna sit down and get Excel going up and look at it, and I went, what's going on? And there it was, okay. I'm not giving, you don't need to give me a medal, but I'm just telling you, if you want to talk about honesty and numbers, that's 3 months of work. Okay, there's no, let me finish. There's no sleight of hand in this, okay? Every single thing that I do is to figure out what's going on. And by the way, when we did discover that problem, we put out a fact sheet on the whole thing, explained exactly how we found it, what we found, and what the implications were. It's very unfortunate that it had that much of an impact, but that is certainly not the only thing that happened this year that caused us to have to raise our rates. We had a lot of other unanticipated expenses that we couldn't deal with. But that, I think, more importantly, that is not the driver for our rates going forward. The driver for our rates going forward is that we have a system that is 125 years old. We have made diligent efforts at replacing mains and infrastructure on our streets when we were repaving them. First decision you make before you pave a road is, do we need to replace the water main? Now, let me finish. The biggest piece of that is under Broad Street, which is not our street, but unfortunately, we own the pipes. There's a section that was put in the 50s that said half of its usable life it should be, except we have breaks constantly because the engineer who was in charge in the 50s apparently didn't inspect it properly, so the stuff was put right on bedrock. This is just stuff that we inherit, okay? We have a reservoir that's 110 years old, it's got roots growing into it. It's not something that you can repair, you have to replace it, that's 1.7 million. The real costs going forward are not the leak, and they're not the $150,000 in extra operational costs from 2023. The real costs going forward that we have to deal with are the roughly $8 to $10 million in capital things that we have to do in the next 5 years if we're gonna keep this system and financing it as best we can. So I understand what you're saying. If you think you're frustrated about this not being discovered sooner, nobody is more frustrated than me, okay? I found it, I raised it with the team. Within a year, we had unaccounted for water dropping by 15%. We have subsequently put a new well pump into well number 4. It increased our output, which has reduced our purchases even more. And more recently, we made some changes to the timing between the interconnection we'll bore you with, but at any rate, that seemed to have dropped our overall water demand by another 15%. So we have made in the last 2 years, we have reduced the total amount of water coming into our system to a lower number than it was in 2006 when we first put the interconnection online. So
yeah, I don't. wanna take
what
up
I'm
any
trying to
more
explain
time.
to you is that every single time we find an opportunity to improve the system, we do it with the means that we have.
And so let me, if I could just kind of, I'm just saying recap, but to kind of tie your question to David's actually.
Mhm.
And you know, not to jump to what we're developing to kind of talk through about what our budget should be going forward. But the reality is, we have one excellent staff person. We all love him, and by the way, he'll continue working for the borough, if we sell it, and doing a lot of, he's also our sewer person. And frankly, we need two of them for sewer purposes. But that $860,000 a year that we spread across town for our current budget doesn't include, frankly, enough staff people to do the things that we're talking about, to do the things that weren't done or weren't seen.
Yeah.
And we will show you in July what we think it should be. And it's more, it's more people and more consultants. And, if we had more, if we would have raised our prices more and gone to a million, spending $1 million in water a year, for example, a couple of years ago, would we have seen these things? Maybe, but we'll also see that at that level of investment in the town, if we're talking today, comparing spending more than $182,000 more for water today without the full staff that we think we need and without the capital investments, we've been very conscious in trying to present the numbers in ways that didn't make it seem like we were, almost to your point, cooking the books of like, well, we've done this for for $650,000 or $800,000 a year. And now, we'll show you why we need $1.2 million to do it. But it's for reasons almost that we can see.
I just want to really clarify, I'm not suggesting, nor have I ever suggested that someone was cooking the books. At all, that is never what I've been suggesting. What I have just been asking is trying to understand how there were so many unexpected costs. And the sense of that it was a passive sort of, we can't look in the past, we just need to look in the future. Instead of sort of, we sort of dug this hole ourselves by certain choices that certain people made, and now here we are. And so I appreciate your continued explanations, I appreciate everyone's work on this, I appreciate hearing other voices. Because David, this stuff inside and out, and hearing other people's perspectives is also very helpful. So thank you, I didn't mean to take up your time, and I'm sure.
But just I'll add one thing, careful, just one thing I'll add, and I think, when we talk about what our responsibilities are and what we should have done differently, right? And honestly, I would say what we should have been doing differently for a long time is not put the operational burden and regulatory, the day-to-day operation literally in the ground and the system monitoring and everything all on the shoulders of a single person. It's just too much to ask one person to do. Because, where that leads is exactly what you're saying. Instead of being proactive, you're just like getting through the next day.
Right,
And the problem is when that, we weren't fully aware of the fact that we really needed to have more support doing that stuff. I mean, I'm doing the regulatory stuff just because I can, some of it, but it's, running a water system is incredibly complicated.
And I think
And we have the
some of
most dedicated person operating that we've ever had on the planet Earth. But we've just
definitely-
asked too much for one person, and that's why some of these things didn't go up the chain of command.
And I think some of us had the belief that the water committee, made up of a geologist, an engineer, and the mayor, were like, because those meetings weren't generally public, and they're, like, we've talked about more about water in the past 2 years than in the first 18 years I've been here. So I think there were some assumptions made from some of us living in town, like, oh, the geologist, the engineer, and the mayor, they,
Right.
got this under control. I
Right.
know it sounds like I'm not gonna make a joke, but it does sound like a joke, right? Like, what do you, but it.
Or something.
So, right, exactly, it does sound like, but it's like, so it is a team effort, and it does take the people who are volunteering and looking at the numbers, and the people who are sitting here through these really long meetings to try to figure out the right solution, so. Thank you.
And I'll just tell you, when I found that evidence of the leak, and I, looking at the loss of water, I started running around and telling everybody and waving my hands, and nobody believed me. They're like, your numbers must be wrong, that can't be right.
I'm sure that was
And
frustrating.
it was. But anyway, so.
Please.
I have a short question. I'm Dave Ackerman from the borough. And this is a simple question about your graph, so if you could put up a graph that has a 10,000 on it. I just wanna.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Green?
There's a green line and there's a black line.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna hold my hand up so I can't see from 2023 onward. All right? And so that's a disaster and we all know it. We just discussed it at length.
Yeah.
To hide that, our rates have always been higher. I mean, the sum of how much we've paid since the seventies and eighties and nineties, whenever we all moved here, has always been higher. And so is that just economy of scale or is there a
Well,
real reason?
Well, of course, it
And
depends.
why have we questioned?
Yeah, it depends on how much you use, because again, we have this graduated rate system. But I mean, because I think at some of the lower usage rates, it took a while for example, New Jersey American to catch up to us, or for us to,
But
but you're right.
line's always lower.
Yeah, I mean, economy of scale, if you think about it, okay, so I just got a number recently for how many customers, when I say customers, that's accounts, not people, right? So in their latest foundational filing, the New Jersey American, they said it's 680,000 accounts. We have 792. So part of that is just, it is economy of scale. And even for public systems, like somebody mentioned to me, they said, wow, I can't remember, it's like the Bucks something or other utility authority across the road that serves New Hope and that whole area. Way bigger than us, but they're a publicly owned utility, not as big as New Jersey American, but I mean, yeah, economy of scale makes a huge difference because we have to contract out everything. I mean, we have a backhoe, but we usually have to contract for a water main break. That's like $10,000 basically to have somebody come in and do it. So a lot of the repairs and certainly all the capital projects we do, and I suppose the larger companies do too, but they get a much more competitive deal when they're hiring somebody to replace.
So their colored lines would be on top of the black line.
What? I'm sorry?
I'm just concentrating on the area between the
Yeah.
green line and.
Right, yeah.
That would be gone if you had a bigger town.
In some case,
In theory, yeah, I mean, depending, at some point, it would probably be
Do
on.
all the systems that we pay for, not just water, but all the municipal things, are they all that way?
they're not all, and if you
No.
look at, and to Sherry's point about, other sales situations and kind of explaining another issue, we may be one of the few systems that are selling in this situation. Predominantly, a town might, those lines might be flipped, where their rates are lower or kept artificially low.
Yeah.
And are interested in a cash infusion only to monetize that difference. And that's when the situation the chair was talking about, trying to hold rates and keep an increase from coming when
Yeah.
they're sold. To your point, if you filled in that line across all of these, we calculated this year at $860,000, we're losing our sunk cost of us operating the system, forgetting debt, forgetting those other things, just with rates is $180,000. And that is the difference between these curves. And it is not unique to this year. It goes back quite a bit on most of the curves. And that is, if we had not been in this business 10 years ago, I don't know how we could calculate what additional money we would have saved as a community necessarily. I suspect that will be offset by the unique situation that we'll talk about stepping back, when Brian's firm, when we first started this, did a investigative report and basically an appraisal of our system. And one of the ways to look at a water system from a value perspective is what income do you get? One of the ways to appraise something is it's called the income approach. You say, every year I make X profit, and then you what's called capitalize that and turn that number into the value that you would buy something for. Well, if you're losing money, you'd think that no one would want to buy the thing, right? Which is kind of what our situation is. As it turns out, we're in that situation, but also there's a buyer willing to pay $6.4 million for it, which is very different than some of these other sales where those lines are reversed.
Also,
That's a good answer, thank you.
oh, just to add to that, a couple of critical things, because, We are dependent on groundwater only, which creates a lot of limitations for our water supply. One of the big ones is if we have to treat something, we can only treat it at the wellhead. We don't have a system that where you can treat in a central way. So one of the things historically that I think I've talked about this before, but not all of you know about it. I mean, we used to have 4 wells, 2 at Burton Avenue, well number 6, and then well number 4. We took well number 6 offline in 2000 because they changed the R6 standard and we couldn't afford to treat it then. We tried to get a congressional appropriation, it didn't come through. Rush Holt did his best, it didn't happen, but 2 wells we lost at Burton Avenue, uranium and radium, both 2 different treatment systems. So the point is, each time there's a change in a regulatory standard and a treatment problem, you have to invest that capital cost in all those locations, which is why we ended up buying New Jersey American. But there are systems that have more choices in terms of water supply. If there's a change in a standard, they can take one well off, they have options, they have flexibility. New Jersey American gets a lot of their water from surface water from some wells. I can't remember how many, it's 90 wells and a whole surface water supply for the Raritan system. They're a lot, because of their scale, not only are their operational costs less, but they're much more adaptable to these regulatory changes than we are. And, PFAS is a great example, because that's like the 4th thing that's popped up in my tenure. It's like, oh, now the other thing, there's another $2 million for treatment. So those kinds of capital costs outside of just the costs of keeping the system going make it even more challenging just to stay in operation. So, sorry.
Can I say one quick thing before your question? I'm sorry, I know you've been there. That I appreciate the uncomfortable question that you asked. And David, that you're pointing out that graph, and I hope that helps frame these outreach sessions into what we want them to be. Is you seeing what we saw in order to come to the conclusion that we had to sell the system. I can remember when Doug said to me, we gotta sell it, and I was like, how dare you? Because it felt like we can't possibly, and then we see these things, we looked at, there's one person running, it isn't feasible. We looked at these graphs and we're paying so much money. And all of that was before we found someone willing to give us money. So I hope that everyone is seeing each part of this. We're gonna do more sessions as you seeing the information that we've seen that help the council realize what's best for our town, what's best for our residents. And it wasn't what we thought it was gonna be. And so you're coming down the road with us in this way, and there were a lot of uncomfortable truths, so I appreciate you asking, and it's some of it's hard to say, we should have done this, we should have done that, but this is where we are, and so we're all moving forward to hopefully something that is better. Thank you.
James Higgins, resident. First of all, thank you for putting the work together. This is fantastic, and I think the session like this is very helpful. And I think breaking them into 3 sessions was brilliant, so thank you.
Otherwise, everybody would fall asleep.
Well, they still fall asleep, but. So just a couple of questions, so I understand the math on this. When I look at the green line, that's actuals, right? Is that? Or those?
Yeah, well, that's our rates. Yeah.
Simple question. The black line is your estimate based on your equations, correct? Based on your assumptions, based on the 900 pages you read. So this isn't actual, this is actual to assumption.
Okay, well, so you have rates for each curve, okay? The rates on the green curve, our curve, are based on our rate ordinances.
Just 2 questions.
Okay.
Your question, my question is, the green is actuals and the black is the estimate.
Theoretically, if we were, yeah, right.
Okay,
But maybe I don't
But it's not an
understand.
estimate, because the rates are the actual.
Thank you. So the green line is the actual local borough rates, the
Right.
black line is the actual New Jersey American.
That's what we would be paying.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so if I asked them to do the same graph, they'd come up with the same numbers.
Yeah.
You did this.
Right,
Yes.
yeah.
So then, that's.
And you'll have that opportunity.
Yeah.
Just like I said, I need to understand the math, because
Yeah.
I'm trying to stay open. So it looks like if we were to go with them, it'd be about $677,000 based on your estimate versus our $860,000 budget, correct? Which is a 27% VIG, correct? Okay. So you say that our expenses are based on actual costs. So the question is, economies of scale is a 27% difference. How can our cost be $860,000 and a publicly traded company be $677,000 if we're using the same amount of water in your estimate? the math doesn't seem to make sense to me.
If you had to hire another, David, it would cost a 15% rate increase.
It doesn't, economies of scale is the answer to the question. It's they're 27% cheaper to do business with. That's it.
Well, one will say it's 27% cheaper to do it in the not full way that we're doing it now. So when you add in the capital work we should be doing and the employees we should have, it's gonna be likely, we'll show you 50%.
Real technical questions.
It's, I would say,
Efficiencies, economies of scale.
yeah,
There's.
Cost of debt, the economics of the
right.
publicly regulated utility is they just charge people for the stuff and spread it across rather than borrowing it, so they don't have interest.
And right now, the borough is paying the same rates for the water from them wholesale as you would pay directly.
Because that helps me with an apples to apples argument. To your second premise, which is the feet on the street, one of the concerns is if you were to sit there and Google question Mike. Can anybody give me some examples of American water coming into a town and what the impact was? You should do that, because it's not just the fear of this, right? It is the fear of South Orange, New Jersey that had, which is a good example, had American water come in. And so I think when you sell a natural resource, that's it. And I think the fear, right, there's a cost, and I get it, and they may be more effective and more efficient to do it than we are. That's great. But when it's sold, it's gone. So the question I'd ask is, have we done our references, which is a question I asked at 57 Hamilton, we got the answer was no. What references have we gone to with other municipalities and boroughs that have sold their water to American Water and given you great examples of how they did it? Because all I can find on the internet is examples of poor examples. And
So
I'd like to-
I'm just, one, we've done a lot of that, and that also includes to talking to people like our other neighbors, like Princeton and Montgomery, and people who have been in West Windsor and longtime users as well. South Orange just approved their sale in November, and I don't even know if they've closed on it. But I'm curious which systems.
Yeah, so it was an article I Googled. Right?
Okay.
So that's why I'm asking, and it's not specific to South Orange. It's the stories that are permeate that tell us that this sometimes doesn't turn out to be so.
Right.
I'd like to hear some good stories.
Yeah, so two things there. One, let's connect, and I want to read that article, and let's make sure we're contacting everyone, because maybe there's people that we've missed. Some of the negative stories are a function of the situation that the town is in. So for example, if our rates were black and their rates were green, some towns decide to sell because they need a bucket of cash for other reasons. And then their low rates, we had a town we were just talking about, frankly, where the deal they thought was to keep their low rates for a certain period of time. And I'm not, it's not blaming their attorneys. I love attorneys. People should hire more attorneys at the time, keep them fully employed. No, but their deal, what they thought was keep our low rates for a couple of years was we'll try to keep your rates. And so their rates more quickly went up to the rates that the rest of the world paid. And they thought their deal was give us a bucket of cash and keep our low rates. And it didn't work out that way. We're a little bit unique here where, the hamburger guy with the bag of money is also going to charge us lower rates, which is when we look at the horror stories, it's largely I don't say, like, if you look at, is it Detroit or Chicago that's privatized their parking meters?
So,
right?
That is a great.
And it's been a disaster.
Right.
But it's because their motivation, amongst other reasons, but their motivation was to take something that worked kind of well, but turn it into a lot of money right away. And that's not our motivation. Turns out we're gonna get some money for it. But I think when we cross-check that article with the people we've talked about, that the horror stories, even outside of New Jersey, are it's like, well, you do this, your rate's gonna go up. Rates, and we'll talk about this, rates will go up. They'll always go up in a steady pace regulated by PPU, but only, we think, after going down considerably and then kind of catching up with how the rest of the world's rates work in a more gradual, systematic, and kind of but a predictable way. We're not in a situation where we have really low rates. We have high rates.
So, and that goes back to my original comment. this is great. I just wanna make sure I understand Apple's actual argument.
Mhm.
I wanna make sure that I understand it correctly, and I wanna understand how the pricing is different, right? And to your point, which is great, our story is different than the stories of others. So thank you very much for answering this.
Thank
Good evening, Tom Masters, resident on West Prospect. So I looked at the annual report of American Water, and it's a $4.7 billion company with a little over $1 billion in net profit. That's more than 22%. Over the next 10 years, they're going to invest more than $40 billion. So if you take that per year, roughly 4 billion, I think actually this year it's 3.5, but on average 4 billion. On a company that's 4.8 billion in revenue, that's quite a bit of investment. So if you take maybe 10%, let's say, of that, will be the rate increases, on top of, let's say, 400 million a year to pay for the bonds they have to put out to finance, $4 billion a year. So that's a very big number. Last year, they increased the rates $283 million.
I'm sorry, this is American Water or New Jersey American, because New Jersey is a subsidiary of
Yeah.
American, which is much larger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and of that 283,
Mm-hmm.
80 million was in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
So they do increase rates, that 283 million over their 4.7 billion, that's about 7 and some percent. So if I look at this number, it's good that this one is up. So we're close to $700 per year. If we change to them, we have a moratorium for 2 years.
No, there's no moratorium. We're on their regional tariff.
Oh, so it will go up immediately.
No,
after a year.
no, it goes up to whatever the regional tariffs are. It's the same tariff that Princeton is on that everybody else is on.
So they will go to the
I
Board of
understand.
Public Utilities.
Yeah,
and
that's
ask
what
for
it
input.
is, yes.
Right.
That's right.
And they have, so that's a nice thing in their annual report, you can actually predict what's going to happen. Because they list all of the applications for rate increases in there, and there is many of them. Hundreds of millions, yeah, in every state they do it. Also in New Jersey, so they got 80 million last year, and they will get more this year and next year, et cetera, because this 4 billion that they have to invest is partly for acquisitions they do, like buying us and others, but also to do the, improvements that they have to do, it's mandated. So it's a company that has a lot of debt. They're $15 billion of debt, so they are very leveraged with a $4.7 billion revenue. I just see a lot of price increases coming in the next 10 years. Yeah, with 40 billion in investments, because guess what? We have to pay for that, right? All of the connected clients have to pay for that investment. So that $700 a year will quickly catch up to the thousands.
Well, quickly,
It will.
what this is showing you is that in 15 years, that's not what's happened. Tom.
Yeah, well,
So-
you are looking at the history.
I know,
I'm looking at the forward,
I know, but
and they are mandated to do all these investments.
As are we.
Yeah, and which,
As are we.
yes, that's the government, and they have to, because we have crappy systems everywhere, like in Hopewell. So there's a lot more, this history is, that's one thing, but the future, it's gonna be something that's very different, because of all these new mandates, new limits on PFAS and you name it, that all has to be paid for. And it's gonna increase our rates quite a bit.
So, I mean, you are correct that the way regulated public utilities work is that they take their investment, ask the government, the state government for an increase. This shows the increases they've gotten compared to ours over the last 15 years. You're also correct that our water system, the systems they run, have state and federal requirements to
Yeah.
improve things. We are looking at those and have projected what, and we'll talk in July, what we think that will cost us. I hear what you're saying. The way I look at it is I don't know that they're gonna catch up to us by going slower. Our rate of increase is higher than theirs, and our ability to do it is less efficient than theirs. And I know there's a profit motive that I think you see that, I understand.
Yeah.
But that's my view of it and what our
So
goal, one second, Tom, is to present tonight the history. And then to look at what our costs and where their rates we think could go, at the next meeting. I hear what you're saying, that you think that they'll increase faster than we will. I don't, but I hear that, and we'll talk about that and kind of present what we know about that then. But that's what would have to happen. We would have to somehow flatten and get better at this exponentially. And they would have to increase much more than they have. And if that were to happen, we, if we were to sell, and Princeton and Montgomery and all of the state of New Jersey would together have to deal with that.
So-
But without any intent though.
No, but then maybe what we should do is ask them, what do you think, based on your future investments that are in your annual report, for $1 billion a year, what do you think your water rate is going to be in 10 years from now?
Yeah.
They sell 330 billion gallons of water. That's about 1.25 cents per gallon. We are roughly at 2.5 cents per gallon. So where's their number gonna be in 10 years with all these investments? The best answer can come from them.
No,
Oh, no, and that's a great question, because they're going to be doing a presentation here, and that's exactly the kind of
So,
question.
yeah,
that's
so we
asked.
need to ask them.
Yeah, yeah,
This is what
absolutely.
you have in your annual report, tell us where it's gonna be in 10 years.
Yep, and because we would never, how would we do it? We would never try to predict where their rates are gonna be. I mean, this is a retrospective thing, I'm obviously not gonna say, oh, just because this is what it was for 15 years, this is what it would be going forward. That's the question for them. What we will be able to do, I think, with a reasonable degree of precision, at least over the next decade. We've been working on this for a while, with Brian's been working on it and Doug together, is to figure out based on the capital cost of stuff we know have to do, we put price tags on all this stuff, we've got engineering estimates, to say, okay, here are finance, this is all gonna happen in July, we're talking about this.
Yeah.
Here are the financing options, here are the possible outcomes, what does that translate into?
Yeah.
So we can come up with a trajectory for us that I think is realistic, I mean, barring other future entities. It would be very interesting to see what they say, yeah,
And they did mention that, with the rising cost of interest, that they have trouble. Then they need, the bonds are gonna be at a higher interest
Right.
rate, so that means for them, they need to pass that on.
okay.
Yep.
So that's another thing. Anyway.
No, that's,
I wanted to make.
you're, very good, very astute question
Comes
comes.
here in person with questions. I'll ask people online to start pushing the raise hand button if you'd like to be recognized. I'm not seeing any. We're not gonna just immediately end, but we'll start just kind of. What everyone watching online, who's watched this video, once it's uploaded to YouTube here in person, really thank you for being a part of this, asking questions. As you're thinking about what you want to know, to Tom's point. Shoot us a note, anyone here, to Doug, because we'll ask them, we'll make them say, that's a great question to ask, and we already started kind of putting things in work to have them here to, take the blows, and frankly, let's start making that list, from things that you'd like to know more about to things that don't think are being presented in a way that is understandable or really anything, how you'd like to receive information, when you'd like to receive it. We're just kind of trying to spread out in as many ways as possible to getting as much information about this so people can make their decisions. It was a great group here tonight. We were thinking, July maybe needed to be at the school with a bigger crowd. I don't know if you have thoughts about how many people might want to come to that, and if it exceeds this room, again, share that type of stuff with us too, because that's what we'll do. Look, David, Sherry, Doug, Brian, I want to thank our municipal attorney's been very helpful in this, our engineer. I'm very appreciative of all the work that's gone into this. Our next step, on the information distribution will be this, we'll get these slides, the video up on the Slash Water website. We will, I think at our next meeting next week, our council meeting, I was doing another update, and we'll start the process of getting the ballot question approved so that we can get that to the county clerk in August, so this could be on the ballot in November. We may have an update about the Board of Public Utilities review of the contract, that's happening at the same time. But again, we really do mean it. If there's different ways to get information, different things you'd like to see, comfortable here in person, I'm here every other Wednesday and a couple Saturdays. Whatever works for you guys, that's what we want to do. So with that, I don't see any hands up. Just thank you everyone for coming. Have a great night. I'm sorry we're not in charge of the weather. Cruise night got moved, not tomorrow night. It's gonna be the 6th. And have a great night.